The call came on an ordinary Tuesday. I was sitting in my Denver loft when a bank fraud investigator named Matthew rang, demanding payment on an overdue $627,000 mortgage. I froze. I rent my loft. But as he recited my social security number and the property address, my blood turned to ice. The address belonged to the luxury modern farmhouse my entitled younger sister, Savannah, had just bought. I had never signed a single piece of paper. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. My reaction was immediate and entirely void of sound. I didn't reach for a tissue or pick up the phone to beg for an explanation. Meltdowns are for people who still believe someone is coming to help them. I had spent 29 years being the help, so I simply disconnected the line. I opened my laptop. My hands were steady, my mind shifting into the cold precision of an audit. Within 5 minutes, I had initiated a hard freeze on all 3 major credit bureaus. I locked down my social security number, cauterizing the wound before I could lose any more. I emailed the investigator back, formally demanding the complete origination file for the mortgage. When the digital file arrived, I scrolled through a life I didn't authorize. There it was, my name, inked over and over on the dotted lines. But it wasn't my hand. I zoomed in, studying the sharp loops and the slight, practiced slant of the letters. I recognized that script instantly. It was my mother's. Susan had sat somewhere, likely at her pristine country club table, and forged my identity to steal over $627,000. It wasn't an oversight, it was a hostile takeover. I had always been the silent machinery of this family. While Savannah played the role of the aspiring lifestyle influencer, constantly needing a larger stage for her aesthetic, I was the supply chain analyst. I built my life on logistics, efficiency, and my own grit. I paid for my industrial loft myself. My independence was treated as a given. My kindness had been a resource they had over-leveraged for decades. But as I read further into the closing documents, looking at the ledger, something else caught my eye. The initial down payment, $85,000. I knew that exact figure. My pulse didn't quicken, but the air in the room seemed to sharpen. I opened another tab, digging deep into the digital archives of my childhood savings accounts, the bonds my grandparents had left me. The emergency fund I had meticulously checked on for years, thinking it was compounding interest for my future, it was gone. The account had been drained entirely 3 years ago, right around the time Savannah started posting house tours on her social media. They didn't just borrow my name. They liquidated my past to fund her present and shackled my future to secure her luxury. The golden child's perfect farmhouse life was entirely subsidized by my stolen heritage. I closed the tabs one by one. I sat in the glow of the screen, refusing to let my mind drift into grief. Regret is just a waste of operational time. This wasn't a family crisis. It was a forensic accounting of a betrayal, and they were about to be liquidated. The housewarming party was in full swing when I arrived at Savannah's new modern farmhouse. Valets were parking cars in the driveway, and hired servers floated through the massive open floor plan with silver trays. I walked straight past the champagne tower and found them near the patio. My mother, Susan, my father, Gary, and the homeowner herself, Savannah. I didn't raise my voice. I just caught my father's eye and gestured for the 3 of them to follow me into the empty kitchen. They stood around the marble island, looking mildly annoyed by the interruption. I reached into my bag, pulled out the stack of mortgage documents, and let them drop onto the counter with a heavy, definitive thud. The page with my forged signature faced up. $627,000 in unauthorized debt. I stated, my voice completely flat, and $85,000 drained from my childhood savings bonds. I watched them closely. I expected the immediate, breathless backpedaling of criminals realizing they had been caught. Instead, what I saw was far more chilling. Gary actually smirked. He leaned back against the custom cabinetry, crossing his arms. It's just strategic planning, Chloe. Savannah needed the house for her brand to secure better sponsorships. Your credit was just an underutilized asset. We simply maximized the family portfolio. Susan reached out and patted my arm as if I were a toddler overreacting to a scraped knee. You should be honored, sweetheart. You're the foundation of your sister's success. Family loyalty means we all contribute to the higher goal. Savannah didn't even put her phone down. She took a slow sip of her champagne, rolled her eyes, and sighed. God, Chloe, stop acting like a martyr. I'm making the payments. It's literally just signatures on a screen. Staring at them, the psychological reality became undeniable. They weren't hiding their guilt because they genuinely did not feel any. To avoid the reality that they were thieves, my parents had rewired their own morality. It was a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. In their delusion, they hadn't committed felony identity theft. They had simply reallocated resources to serve the child they actually valued. Family loyalty was just a convenient mask for narcissistic exploitation. They didn't see me as a person. To them, I was a line of credit. I was an appliance whose sole operational purpose was to keep Savannah's lifestyle powered on. Just signatures, I repeated the absurdity of the phrase settling over me like ash. Exactly, Susan smiled, entirely misinterpreting my tone as submission. So please, smooth out your face, grab a glass, and go mingle. Savannah has a photographer arriving in 20 minutes, and we need the aesthetic to be perfect. I didn't throw my glass. I didn't launch into a monologue about how much they had hurt me. I simply looked at the three of them, perfectly framed in their stolen luxury, and turned around. I walked out the front door, down the manicured walkway, and got into my car. Through the closed windows, the upbeat jazz of the band thumped against the evening air. The laughter of my family became a distant, muffled noise. Sitting in the driver's seat, I analyzed my own reaction. People often wonder why victims don't explode in a fiery rage when betrayed. But screaming is a communication tool for people who believe their pain matters to the audience. I had learned long ago that my tears were just data points they used to label me as dramatic. My outrage was nothing more than an inconvenience they would gladly ignore. Screaming was a waste of breath on people who had willingly deafened themselves to my humanity. My silence wasn't a surrender. It was the chilling restraint of a strategist preparing the final strike. I wasn't going to spend a single ounce of emotional energy trying to negotiate empathy from parasites. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the suburban illusion they had built on my back. As the streetlights of downtown Denver washed over my windshield, the last remaining thread of familial obligation snapped. The family dynamic was dead. What remained was a purely transactional reality. They had executed a hostile takeover of my financial identity, and I was about to initiate a ruthless restructuring. I drove back to my loft, the only space I had, built entirely on my own terms. I walked inside, locked the door, and opened my laptop once again. It was time to transition them from relatives to defendants. I didn't owe them a warning. I only owed them consequences. Monday morning, I didn't go to the office. I went to a glass high-rise in downtown Denver. I sat across a heavy mahogany desk from Mr. Robert Evans, a financial fraud attorney known for being as relentless as he was expensive. I didn't bring a tragic backstory. I brought a meticulously organized binder of evidence. He reviewed the forged agreements and the paper trail of the $85,000. When he looked up, his expression was void of pity. That was exactly what I needed. We weren't here to mediate. We were here to prosecute. We file a formal police report for felony identity theft today, he said, and we execute a hard legal freeze on the property and all associated accounts by noon. I didn't hesitate. Initiate the process. By 1 o'clock, I was at the precinct. By 3 o'clock, the bank was officially notified, triggering an absolute freeze on the loan. Savannah's ongoing luxury renovations would be halted instantly. Contractors would walk off the job. The bank was effectively turning her farmhouse into a mortgaged crime scene. But the legal freeze was only the beginning. The next afternoon, Mr. Evans called me with an update that extinguished the last flickering ember of my grace toward them. He had gained access to the full payment history. Savannah hadn't just fallen behind on the loan because she was careless. She had intentionally stopped making payments exactly 4 months ago. Mr. Evans laid out their strategy with surgical precision. My family knew my salary was stable and highly visible. Their plan wasn't just to use my credit, it was to let the loan deliberately default. Once the bank issued a legal judgment, they would automatically garnish my corporate wages. They had engineered a system where my paycheck would fund Savannah's lifestyle forever. It wasn't just a theft, it was premeditated financial enslavement. They had planned to turn my career into a passive income stream for their golden child. Hearing this didn't make me cry. It simply clarified the objective. They were entirely parasitic. There was no misguided loyalty here, only a calculated attempt to consume my life. I thanked Mr. Evans and looked out the window. The air felt remarkably crisp. Knowing the absolute depths of their malice was liberating. It removed all the emotional variables from the equation. There was no more family. There were only targets. And I was about to bankrupt them. The fallout was swift and absolute. Once the legal freeze hit, the capital pipeline to Savannah's farmhouse evaporated. Her paradise was instantly downgraded to an abandoned construction site. Mr. Evans sent updates detailing the collapse. Contractors walked off the job mid-shift when their checks bounced, leaving the luxury kitchen gutted. The bank initiated rapid foreclosure proceedings. Savannah was locked out of her own curated illusion. But the true masterpiece occurred on a Friday evening. My parents were dining at their exclusive country club. They were halfway through their entrees when 2 plainclothes officers approached their table. Under the crystal chandeliers and the stares of their peers, Gary and Susan were publicly served with criminal subpoenas for felony identity theft and bank fraud. In a matter of seconds, their most prized possession, their manufactured social reputation, was completely bankrupted. 3 days later, my building's intercom buzzed. I checked the camera feed. There they were, huddled on the sidewalk outside my loft. The country club arrogance had been liquidated. Savannah looked unkempt, her sunglasses failing to hide her swollen eyes. Gary was pale, staring at the concrete. Susan clutched her purse in raw, suffocating terror. I took the elevator down and stepped out onto the front stoop. I didn't gloat. I stood there, perfectly calm. "Chloe, please," my mother choked out. "We're losing everything. The club canceled our membership. The bank is taking the house. Your father could go to jail." Savannah was openly sobbing. "You have to drop the charges, Chloe. I'm going to be homeless. We're family." I looked at them. I didn't see family. I saw a toxic asset that I had successfully divested from. "I didn't do anything to you," I stated, my voice as unyielding as the concrete. "I simply stopped financing your crimes. You forged my name. You stole my savings. You planned to garnish my wages. Those were your transactions. These are your penalties. Please," Gary whispered, "just drop the charges. I beg you." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a copy of the bank's official foreclosure notice, and held it out. Savannah took it with trembling fingers. I looked my father directly in the eyes, feeling nothing but the absolute certainty of my own power. "I already dropped you," I said. I turned around, walked back inside, and let the security door click shut, locking them outside in the wreckage they had built. The legal dust settled over the next several months, burying their illusion under a mountain of court dates. Gary and Susan managed to avoid a prison cell, but just barely. They were sentenced to strict criminal probation in order to pay massive restitution. Their country club days were permanently over. They were forced to downsize into a cramped apartment they could actually afford on their own merit. Savannah's downfall was even more public. When the details of the fraud investigation leaked, her influencer reputation imploded. Sponsors dropped her immediately. It turns out you cannot sell an aspirational lifestyle to the internet when everyone knows you tried to financially enslave your sister to fund it. As for me, the bank fully cleared my name. My credit was meticulously restored, and the $85,000 they stole was legally ordered to be repaid to me with interest. My financial portfolio was secure once again. I sit in my sunlit industrial loft now, sipping my morning coffee. The silence here is profound, unbothered, and entirely my own. Society constantly pushes the narrative that we must always forgive, that family is an unbreakable bond. But I have learned a much harder, truer lesson. Forgiveness is not always a virtue. Sometimes it is simply a weapon that toxic people use to maintain their access to you. You do not owe your loyalty to a bloodline that only views you as an asset to be liquidated. The highest form of self-love isn't a dramatic reconciliation. It is simply a locked door and a dial tone. I don't harbor anger toward them anymore. Anger requires an emotional investment that I am no longer willing to pay. They are bankrupt accounts I have permanently closed. I am simply free. The weight I carried for 29 years has been lifted. The future is finally, beautifully, and exclusively mine. If you've ever had to cut ties to protect your own peace and future, drop a lost in the comments. You aren't alone. Subscribe for more stories of surviving, thriving, and reclaiming your power.